Don't get me wrong, there's no magic fix when it comes down to lowering your blood sugar, but there are supplements that seem to have some pretty profound results when it comes to lowering your glucose. So let's jump in. The first one is one that you've probably heard of before, and we're going to talk about it, but then I believe there are some ones that might even overshadow this first one. So this first one is probably the most popular one that's talked about on the internet. However, it comes with a serious downside. So we're going to break it down. Hey, after today's video, I popped a link down below for Thrive Market. They're an online membership-based grocery store. So it makes it so you can get all of your groceries delivered to your doorstep and you just shop in one stop. Okay, that way you can get your frozen meat, your seafood options, but also things that are in the better for you category. So they vet products out beforehand so you don't have to. Also, that is a 30% off discount link. So 30% off your entire first order, plus you get a free gift when you utilize that link down below in the description. So check out Thrive Market, try some grocery shopping through them, and let me know how you'd like them. That link down below, just below this video in the top line of the description. Number one is berberine. Now, berberine is generally taken in like a 300 to 500 milligram dose 2 to 3 times per day. Now, berberine is something that you want to be taking consistently. It doesn't necessarily fix the issue, so to speak. So it's something that you consistently use. But let's look at some research. There was a study published in the journal Metabolism that took a look at 2 different trials. They took a look at a group of people that were newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and they put them on either berberine or metformin. Okay, then they had another group of people that had poorly managed type 2 diabetes. So people that just had it for a while and weren't really taking care of themselves. And they put them on either berberine or metformin. They found that the newly diagnosed group had tremendous results with berberine. It was almost as good as, and in some categories, as good as metformin. That's tremendous. But what they really found is that the people that had type 2 diabetes for a while and had it not really under control, they were the ones that had tremendous results. In fact, they saw over a 28% reduction in their fasting insulin levels and a 44% reduction in their HOMA-IR. That's sort of their longer term insulin levels measured over time. Now, what's interesting is that it worked better for people that had worse insulin resistance. So what's important to note is that if you're a healthy person, you might not get a whole lot out of berberine. And that's where a lot of the information on the internet's confusing. Like if you are just trying to reduce your glucose spikes, you may not want to use the money on berberine and you may want to find something else. But if you're someone that's maybe utilizing metformin, berberine could help in tandem with that. It's important to note that metformin is working via AMPK and attenuating that or increasing that. Completely different mechanism than berberine, where berberine is really more of an alpha-glucosidase inhibitor, and it's actually just slowing down digestion of carbohydrates. So berberine can be used in tandem with metformin, not really designed to be in place of. However, if you get things under control, then who knows, right? Now let's move into number 2, which is one of my favorite ones. It's called benfotiamine, and benfotiamine is technically a fat-soluble version of vitamin B1. Now, there are some in vitro studies that show that it prevents high glucose. That's great, like it can lower glucose. We've seen that in some data, but that's not the real reason that I want to talk about benfotiamine, because first of all, that's in vitro research. I don't really want to take that to the bank. That means it's done in like a cultured dish. However, it's still promising data. Where I find benfotiamine interesting is it reduces the damage that occurs from longer term high glucose. So if you're someone that maybe newly found out that you're insulin resistant or something like that, you are a good candidate for benfotiamine, which is something easy to get. We're talking 150 to 300 milligrams or so, something really easy that you can get inexpensively on Amazon. The cool study that I want to mention was one that was published in the Journal of Diabetes Investigation. And what it found was that benfotiamine reduced the overall oxidative damage and subsequent DNA damage that occurs from high levels of glucose. So that means if you've had high glucose for a long time and it's starting to damage your DNA and starting to make it more of a systemic long-term problem, you may be able to course correct that. So it's something that you take for the longer term. As a matter of fact, if I go through a period of time where I have higher amounts of carbohydrates, I will take benfotiamine because I feel like it's reducing the potential downside that comes with higher carbohydrate ingestion. This next one is one that is good for everybody. Seriously, it's magnesium, and it's something that a lot of us are deficient in. And I typically recommend 400 to 800 milligrams of magnesium. 800 milligrams if you're a bigger person that is exercising more. And I typically recommend what's called a dimagnesium malate, which is more of a longer-term sustained release. If you took 400 or 500 milligrams of straight magnesium citrate, you might be seatbelted to the toilet for a little while. Now, there's a meta-analysis that looked at 12 different large-scale studies, and out of these 12 studies, they found that 8 showed that magnesium supplementation decreased glucose. 7 of them showed that it improved insulin resistance. And what they also found, what was really interesting, is that for every 50 milligram increase in magnesium supplementation, there was a 3% correlated decrease in glucose, which was more pronounced in people that were deficient in magnesium. So the more deficient in magnesium you are, the more glucose modulation benefit you will get via supplementation. What makes magnesium so unique in this particular case is it regulates tyrosine kinase activity in what are called insulin receptor cells. So basically, it's making the insulin receptor cells more sensitive to the signal from insulin. So the other things we're talking about are just like mechanically reducing glucose. This actually increases the affinity of the cell to accept insulin and therefore lower glucose. So something that we could all benefit from. This next one is a short-term and long-term fix. It can work short-term in digestion, but also longer-term as far as helping out oxidation. And I'll explain what that means. And that's a simple B-complex vitamin. B-complex vitamins are dirt cheap, and candidly, we urinate them out so fast when we get them from food, it is good to supplement them. There was a study published in Clinical Nutrition. It took a look at 80 people, and it put them on either a placebo or a simple B complex in oral form for 12 weeks. And they found amazing results. They found reductions in glucose, reductions in insulin with the B complex, but they also found reductions in homocysteine. Now, homocysteine can cause issues and actually destroy pancreatic cells. So B vitamins help break down the homocysteine into components that can be metabolized by the human body. When homocysteine is not metabolized and broken down, it wreaks havoc and causes damage. In this case, it's damaging pancreatic islet cells, which are very important to insulin formation. So essentially, it's a simple, inexpensive thing. One of the things that I recommend is that you take vitamin B or any B complex with food. If you take it without food, you tend to urinate it out much faster, and it is something you might need to take twice per day. Number 5 is an interesting one, and it's DHEA, which becomes even more important over the age of 30, 40, and gets more important as we get older. Okay, interesting thing about DHEA is it stands for dehydroepiandrosterone. It is a precursor to a lot of important sex hormones. And our levels of DHEA decline between the ages of 25 and 75 by 80%. There was a 6-month-long study that had subjects just add 50 milligrams of DHEA per day, and they found that it increased their insulin sensitivity and it increased their glucose tolerance, so their ability to utilize glucose, but it decreased their inflammation, interleukin 6. And the researchers speculate that the reason it improved the glucose metabolism was because of the reduction in inflammation. So there's 1.5 million reasons you might want to consider taking even a low dose, like 25 milligrams or even less DHEA. But the fact that the inflammation is actually affecting our glucose metabolism makes it even more exciting. Number 6 is a root, or people like to call it an herb, that is super, super, super underrated. And it's one of my favorite natural compounds that's out there. And I think it deserves way more attention. Okay, it's ginseng. Now there's multiple forms. There's American, there's Korean. I happen to be a fan of the Korean. I think it's the most pungent, the most research-backed. But as far as glucose modulation, there's some interesting data. There was a study in the European Journal of Nutrition that had subjects either go in a placebo group or a group where they had ginseng in an amount of 1 gram per meal per day. So roughly 2 to 3 times per day, they were having 1 gram of ginseng with meals. They saw reductions in their HbA1c, but most of all, they saw reductions in their postprandial glucose. 20% reduction over the control, as a matter of fact, over the placebo. So postprandial glucose is the glucose spike that happens after we eat. So ginseng specifically seems to be very good for that. So ginseng would be something you'd want to consume, whether it's in capsule form, liquid, root, whatever. You'd want to consume it literally with your carbohydrate meals. A 20% reduction is nothing to sneeze at, because this study did look at it taking it with food. Longer term, I don't know what it's going to do, but in the short term with food, That's a profound effect. Now, the next one is going to be simply vitamin D. Now, if you're deficient in vitamin D, this is obviously going to be a more profound effect. Now, there's a study that found that 4,500 IUs of vitamin D had a tremendous impact on lowering glucose and lowering HbA1c. It's thought that it A, helps directly produce insulin, but B, it stimulates the gene expression that creates pancreatic beta cells. So you might literally create more pancreatic cells in the first place. So therefore, you're having more ability to produce insulin and lower glucose. So vitamin D is one of those things where you may want to modulate it based upon your time outside. If you're not outside a whole lot that day, then take a couple thousand IUs. If you are outside that day, don't take it. So your body still understands how to synthesize it properly from the sun, because there's always a risk there with any kind of synthetic vitamin. Number 8 is one that I saved for last on purpose because it's very interesting. It's called gymnema. Now, the thing with gymnema is it literally means, in Hindu, sugar destroyer. It's pretty cool. So it's an Indian herb, and we're starting to see it come out in the research a lot more. One study in particular took a look at 22 type 2 diabetics. It was published in Ethnopharmacology. It was an 18 to 20 month study. So long term, they saw reductions in fasting glucose and significant reductions in HbA1c. So much so, there were 5 participants that were able to come off of their diabetes or blood sugar meds altogether. Now, the mechanism here is interesting. It's proposed that A, it directly stimulates insulin secretion. So when the body takes in carbs, it more potently produces insulin. But secondly, it's potentially inhibiting the inactivity of basically insulin recognition in the liver. What that means is that the liver is able to see glucose in the bloodstream better and ultimately send a signal to the pancreas to produce insulin. So very promising stuff coming out there. Too early to really tell, but cheap enough and easy enough to implement. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.